Success Insight shares the stories of the people with passion and drive who make things happen in the world. Here's your host, Howard Fox.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Success Insight podcast. Today's episode of Success Insight is another addition to our Outdoor Adventure series, and it's a pleasure to introduce you to Ken Keffer. Ken is a freelance writer and speaker, a professional naturalist and award-winning environmental educator and author, and Ken has penned 7 books connecting kids and the outdoors. Ken is currently on the Outdoor Writers Association of America Board of Directors. Ken, welcome to the Success Insight podcast.
Hey there. Thank you so much for having me.
Fantastic. And, a full shout out again to the Outdoor Writers Association, because if I hadn't been introduced to the association, you and I might not have met. It was definitely good karma, I think.
Yes, certainly. That is one of the things we strive at OWAA is to make these sort of connections.
Fantastic. Now, Ken, I have really barely scratched the surface of your background as a naturalist and environmental educator. I'm wondering if you could, for our audience, give us a kind of a 30,000-foot view of your background and how you came to be in this very niche area and also to take on this moniker of writer, speaker, educator.
Yeah. So I like to joke that I was born fully bearded in Wyoming. Only part of that's probably true, but I grew up in Wyoming and, outdoor kid, hiking, exploring. There's a bike path outside of town that, has a rut in it all these years later from my bike going back and forth over it. So I knew I kind of wanted to explore an outdoor career. And I actually have a degree in wildlife biology. And off to college, I went and, researched animals, mostly kind of small game, some bird stuff. But the thing I really enjoyed being out in the field and doing some of this research was a lot of the environmental education. I liked talking to the people about our research and about our work. And so that got me into more of the nature education side of things. And the communications just sort of grew out of some of that work. And so, I think with my science background and my kind of communication skills, I'm able to bring a little more content into a broad audience. And so that's sort of the overlap and really my target.
Fantastic. Now, just, full shout out to the beard for our listeners. I'm sure this banner that we're going to have for this podcast is going to have Ken's beard. And I do have to ask, is this beard, have you had this one for a while?
Yeah.
Since you're like early teens?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, it's definitely been a part of me. It's taken a number of shapes over the years. And, I have definitely had some sort of facial scruff all along. And it's just become a part of me for sure.
Fantastic. And I have to say, being from Wyoming, an outdoorsy kind of guy, I was expecting a flannel shirt, but we'll let that one kind of slide off. So in your education, I imagine you have traveled to study small animals and birds, et cetera, in some very far away places. What are some of those exciting locales you've been to?
Yeah. So, kind of during college and summers in between semesters and even the first couple of years out of school, I was doing, field biology research, and those are often short-term contract positions. And so, I was able to move about and work in some really cool locations. I spent a lot of summers in Grand Teton National Park working on some small mammal research there. I did some prairie dog stuff in Northeast Wyoming. I worked on flying squirrels in Southeast Alaska for a while. So that was a fun project, looking at sort of habitat use and where the squirrels were hanging out up there. And I remember taking a flying squirrel in, we would live trap them and then release them later. We're looking at some movement stuff, but I had a squirrel in a classroom one day and it actually got out in the classroom. And that was one of my earliest, excitements in environmental education was, the kids were super excited. They're definitely not going to forget that experience. And so again, that communication is part of it. But I also worked with the Denver Zoological Foundation, the conservation branch there at the zoo. And I worked on Bactria and Camel project in the Gobi Desert of Mongolia. So that was my first big international trip. I had to get a passport to go to Mongolia.
So passport, I imagine a couple shots as well. And I also would imagine you probably had some beautiful stargazing out in the Gobi Desert.
Yeah, absolutely. The crew, they talked about the stars, before I got to go. And I think the skies are so amazing. And what I realized that when I got out there, absolutely like stunning night sky. But for me, being in kind of rural Wyoming, we also have pretty incredible skies, and so it was less impressive than my standard. Based out of the crew that was there in Denver, their night sky was a little less comparable than my Wyoming night sky, perhaps. But yeah, so those are wonderful memories. That was some of the coolest work I got to do, and I've stayed in touch with the Mongolian biologists. Adi and I, Facebook friends and the such. So it's been fun to watch that project kind of continue on.
That's fantastic. And what kind of animals are you researching and studying? And, I have a friend of mine she just adores wolves. And I imagine we can't all research wolves. And so what were you focusing for your research?
Well, my Twitter handle is actually Sorex cinereus, which is the scientific name for the masked shrew. And it's a small mammal, real high metabolism, pretty spastic. So I can relate to that in a lot of ways. But yeah, we researched, I've worked on projects, like I said, the flying squirrels. I've worked on prairie dogs. I worked on some microtus, some voles, like mice and vole projects, and some habitat use things. I've also worked on larger species. I worked on a highway underpass project with some mule deer migration for the most part in Western Wyoming. And so looking at, highway underpasses and traffic patterns and things. I'm a pretty big bird guy as well. So I've worked for a couple of different bird nonprofit organizations over the years and gotten to do some neat research with some of those projects. And so, yeah, kind of a lot of it's the maybe underappreciated aspects of nature in a lot of ways, and kind of giving those some storytelling time as well. So yeah, although honestly, full disclosure, on that small mammal project in the Tetons, it technically was a wolf research project because we were looking at some areas pre-wolf and post-wolf. And so the wolves of Yellowstone were sort of extirpated. They were, killed off in that area and then re-released in, I think, 95 was the year. And that has huge ecological impacts. Wolves mostly eat elk and these big game species, but they also move the animals on the landscape. And so things like the willow trees respond to less browse by the elk. And so you're seeing things like small mammal impacts and yellow warblers, for example, kind of moving in. So it's all connected, but really I'm much more of the non-game side of things.
It's interesting. You literally just hit it, and everything is connected. And I'd like to perhaps chat a little bit more about that because, we kill off either intentionally because, they're attacking our grazing animals and we think we're doing ourselves the environment a service. But in reality, there's an upstream effect or a downstream effect because of that one action. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about that in the form of conservation activities today. But I am curious, for example, the Sorex cinereus, the shrew, what would you tell our listeners about that small little mammal as it relates to something that we don't know? What kind of impact do they have in their environment, and where are they in terms of their, they probably have the species they're tracking, or maybe they're herbivores. I don't know. You'll inform me and our audience in a second, but what impact are they having on their environment? And what was the reasoning behind your studies?
Yeah, so the shrews, they're these really tiny little, think like cotton ball size little mammals, and they've got pointed little snouts, and they're ferocious predators. So they eat a lot of insects. They eat some invertebrates. They can eat worms and things. And they even have a little bit of slightly kind of venomous bites to them. So they can actually kill larger prey than themselves. So they can, take out a little microtus, a little vole, like kind of a little mouse thing. So they're super cool critters, just fascinating for that aspect of it, but definitely playing a role in that kind of lower level food chain. And then not many things eat shrews actually, but a few would for sure, kind of the shrew part of it. And then the microtus, the vole part of it, that was looking at some habitat stuff as well. And so our shrews were usually not our targets that we were trying to live capture, but occasionally we would catch them. And I just, kind of was fascinated by them. But the rest of the small mammal cohorts there, we were looking at whether, the landscapes were a little bit drier, a little bit wetter, and who was living where. Sort of, if you're a coyote, it doesn't really matter to you if you're eating a prairie vole or a mountain vole. You're eating a vole, right? But it was sort of an interesting research. And we could show that the prairie voles were living in different places than the montane, the mountain voles and stuff. So yeah, some of that habitat use things. And then, like I said, all of this kind of trickles down or up the food chains and the such. And so, with the wolves coming in, coyotes are not spending as much time there because wolves are, going to chase the coyotes around and stuff. And so it all works its way. So again, it just goes back to kind of interconnected stuff. And similar stuff, kind of another project I worked on was with black-footed ferret research. And so the ferrets were one of the most endangered mammals of all. They were actually thought to have been just extinct. They just, were not around for a number of years. And then this is another Wyoming story. Kind of Shep the cow dog outside of Meeteetse, Wyoming, brought this ferret back, and the owners didn't know what it was. And they took it into to a taxidermist in town. And they're like, oh, this is that animal that, everyone thought was extinct. And so a small isolated population was rediscovered. And eventually they were down to, I can't remember the numbers, but it was like, 18 individuals left, maybe even less. And so they had some disease issues. They brought them into captivity and did some captive breeding and stuff. And now, sort of relocations and captive breeding, able to have ferrets back out on the landscape in a number of populations across the West. But that's an example of something that's so specialized. We talk about kind of generalist approach where if you're a coyote, you can live in a number of places and find something to eat and survive. If you were a black-footed ferret, 98% of your diet is prairie dogs. That is what you are specialized for. And that's a great lifestyle unless something bad happens to the prairie dog populations, and then you're out of luck as well. So it's kind of an interesting approach to nature, generalist versus the specialist.
I was going to ask you a question about the prairie dogs because I seem to recall a story about them where whether they were hunted or they just, definitely a population was dwindling, and maybe it was due to man's development in the area. But perhaps that was the story where those unintended consequences. If the prairie dogs are in decline, the ferrets are not going to have a steady diet, and therefore they're going to decline.
Yeah. Prairie dogs, black-tailed prairie dogs, kind of been restricted to about 2% of their historic habitat. So kind of found from southern Canada through northern Mexico and basically the eastern Rockies, kind of eastern, Wyoming, eastern Montana, down through Colorado and, all the way to Mexico. And so, a number of factors, including human caused, some of it's exotic disease stuff. So prairie dogs are susceptible to plague, which is kind of a non-native disease. So populations crash for that reason. And then the impact's back on the ferrets. Again, just it's all connected to nature.
So given all of this work and these studies, how are you able to take these high-level points or maybe even some of the details and make it, and forgive me for saying this word, interesting to young kids so that they will have a new appreciation for nature and the environment and being more consciously aware as they're growing up that, I can't just spit out my gum, drop a piece of trash on the ground, throw out a plastic bag, and realize there's going to be some repercussions. How are you taking your knowledge, your book of knowledge, and then helping to educate children?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, I like to say that kids know how to be kids. In a lot of ways, it's the adults that get in the way of childhood, And so if you have a kid outside, they're going to be into it. You can bring just a little encouragement, get them to flip over a rock and to see what's poking around underneath there, skipping rocks or laying and watching the clouds float by. So the kids outdoor adventure book was my first project, my first big kids book that came out. And I remember I got a review, a little harsh on it, honestly. And they were like, when we first bought this, we thought, oh, great, there's 448 activities, but so many of them are fairly simple activities like watching the clouds float by. And so I thought this was a little bit of a disappointment for a purchase. And then I gave it to I think it was a grandkid that they bought the book for. But those kids, they just lit up and they just had so much fun. And it was those simple activities that really got their spark going and connected them. And so the review ended up being a positive review. And they're like, once I handed it over to the kid loved it, and for all of these great reasons. And so I just it was a point that really stuck with me, though, that kids know how to be kids, and, kids can embrace so much information and all of these nature stories. They're so crazy and fascinating. And, you've got superheroes and villains, and you can play it that way, or you can do sports comparisons and make it, the biggest jumpers or the farthest, flyers and stuff. There's a lot of ways to connect with any audience. It's, the same whether it's a youth audience or an adult audience. And so finding some of those relatable things, but then, and part of it's just sheer enthusiasm. It can be the most abstract sort of concept that you're just having a conversation with somebody. And if they're really into it, you're going to be really into it too, for them and for you. So I find that with curling talk a lot too. I'm a big curling guy, and it's just so fascinating. You get excited about it. Enthusiasm is contagious.
Curling. Now, you don't have a Canadian accent, though.
No, I sort of, the Olympics. I've always been an Olympic fan. And so I went to see the curling in the 2002 Salt Lake Olympics.
Oh, wow. Fantastic. So, Ken, we have a series within the Success Insight podcast. It's strictly children's book authors. So I would love to definitely have a conversation with you about coming back on to do another podcast about your children's books and hear more about them, so they'll fit very nicely into that series. I hope you'll be open to that little podcast adventure as well.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
So now that you're out there, you were doing the research, and I'm assuming you're continuing to do research, or are you more into the writing for local organizations, whether it's birds and flowers, wildlife? How is your working life constructed today?
Yeah, I, sort of out of college did those biology research projects. And then I landed a couple of positions as, an environmental educator. I was working at nature centers, working for environmental nonprofits, and I worked for a bird observatory, which is a, research kind of an education group. And so I always sort of maintained that connection with public programs and the such. The writing came out of those sorts of opportunities where, I started to write some magazine articles and do some freelance work. And it's sort of translating some of these concepts and this research stuff for a broader audience. So then I do I've got book stuff that I work on. I've got some magazine things that I'm, work on, some freelance projects. And then I also, I work for a bird seed retail job as well, because, freelance can only pay so many of my bills at this point. But yeah, even that's still a fun. I work for a company, that I believe in, and I still get to talk nature daily with our customers there. So even that I look at as an environmental educational role.
I find that fascinating, especially with the bird seed, coming from the Chicago area. I lived in an apartment community or a condo community right off Michigan Avenue. We had a kind of a gated parking lot, and we had townhomes on two sides, and then the loft apartment on one side, which is where I live. But it was like Grand Central Station early in the spring and throughout the summer, early in the morning. I'm an early morning guy. I've got to have my early morning coffee. It's quiet. But it was like Grand Central Station with these birds. And my harbinger of spring was always the cardinal. And I would love to have had like a bird feeder that would attract the cardinals.
Yeah.
Out here in Vegas, where I live now, I'm not as excited about it because I don't see there's a lot of bird varieties, though I do have the stars. So you got to take the good with the bad. You know what I'm going to say?
You've got birds out there too.
I want to get out to the desert, like to Mojave National Preserve or Death Valley, or was it the something of fire? I forget what the name of it is. You'll know what it is. The Valley of Fire.
Valley of Fire, yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to be able to kind of early enough just to sit there and observe, not to go hiking, but just to observe and see what are the birds, what are the ground squirrels, or as I like to say in the desert, desert fast food.
Right.
I think wherever you live, you have to, and especially if you move from one part of the country to another, I think you have to learn to appreciate what is there. And part of it is just getting outside, going outdoors, and just being open to, being quiet and observing. And I think as humanity goes, I think we could all do a better job of that.
Oh, certainly. I think you've got like 2 points there that are just really, really valid, in that nature is everywhere. You just step outside and you can be interacting with nature. You don't have to go to all of the national parks to experience nature. And those are great places to be. But nature can also be on Michigan Avenue. There's things to look at and appreciate. And then, like you said, the other part is just taking the time, because it's really easy to miss nature too. If you're not actually trying to be in tune to it, it can be the backdrop of anything else. And so, yeah, part of that's just that awareness and being like, I'm going to pay attention to what's around me. And whether it's the birds that get you excited, or it's the small mammals, or it's the stars, giving that first little bit of awareness, and then you'll start to notice other things around it as well. So yeah, those are perfect points.
And with your participation with the Outdoor Writers Association of America, you're on the board. Tell us more about your activity there and how you became affiliated with them, and what is the talk more for our listeners' benefit, your role and what you're doing, and how that's kind of informs perhaps some of the future work you're going to be doing of being part of an organization like this.
Yeah. I mean, I really owe my career in a lot of ways to OWAA, kind of the Outdoor Writers. I'd written a couple of the kids' books and had done some magazine work when I came across the organization. And I went to, it's been a number of years now that I went to the conference where I got a fellowship. I got a little scholarship to attend that first conference there as kind of an outdoor writer. And it's just it's a professional organization for outdoor communicators. It's called the Outdoor Writers Association, but really it's, outdoor communicators, and it's podcasters, it's newspaper columnists, it's magazine, it's photojournalism, it's video, it's sort of all of these. And the thing that ties us all together is our outdoor aspect. And so it's really kind of a neat group. And we do, monthly webinars, sort of craft improvement things so we can all improve our skills. And we also really, try to keep up on current topics in conservation and in nature. And so sort of it's a dual approach for learning for our membership and for others. And so for me, it's been really valuable to have those connections, and they end up becoming, kind of professional colleagues, but also sort of your support staff and support friendships and things. As you know, some of this work, kind of as a freelancer, I can spend a lot of time in my own house and forget to get outside, and or just have some sort of question about like, hey, if I want to get into this other, aspect of journalism, maybe I can a little mentorship and things with writing. So yeah, for me, it's been a great organization, and happy to be on the board. And we've really been got a kind of a new diversity, equity, and inclusion aspect to the organization, where we've gone through a guided kind of a number of workshops over the last year and stuff. And so really trying to get up on some of those important topics as well. So it's been a professional and personal area of growth for me in the last few years with Outdoor Writers Association of America.
Fantastic. And, I definitely am really excited about having just joined it for our listeners. I mean, it's just relatively new, and it's how I was introduced to you. And, in what I'm finding right now is, one, I need to put the time in my calendar. So when the meetings are held, the Zoom meetings, because it's a learning opportunity, it's also a networking opportunity, but also to be exposed to the work that other people are passionate about. And that's what I find fascinating right now. Is I just started another conversation with a woman who writes books about traveling with their dog. And it's like, wow, I just did a podcast with a guy who wrote a book about his last travel with his dog who passed away. But these are two people that I think ought to meet and just making connections. And I think that's what I love about organizations, like the OWAA. One thing you just talked about, you mentioned the word diversity and inclusion, and especially when we have in the inner cities. And one thing let me just maybe preface that COVID's been a strange time for us. And I think it's strange in our own unique ways. And in the big city, there was not often perhaps the opportunity to get out and about and explore. And whereas out here in Vegas, I mean, I can get in my car and be out in the desert in 45 minutes. How do we help young kids who perhaps all they know is the block that they live on? I worked with an author on a podcast a couple of years ago, and he alluded to, some kids get raised in New York, and they never go 2 or 3 blocks away. They've never been to Central Park. What kinds of programs do you see where it's taking kids who maybe haven't been exposed to nature, the environment, small animals, What exposure have you been involved with that has taken kids and put them in nature, put them in exploration, maybe doing weekends away, learning how to camp? Any experience in that area?
Yeah, certainly. I've got a couple of, just personal examples, perhaps, and maybe some broader things as well. So I worked in Milwaukee for a number of years. And yeah, we had a couple of camp programs and stuff. And I remember one student came out and there was a little, group of students, and we had them for a week long of programs, kind of every day for Monday through Friday. And the first day out, they were a little hesitant, and so we, slowly got into it and more involved with some of the nature stuff. And really by the end of the week, I just always remember this little boy. He was, probably, I don't know, 8 or 10 maybe. And by the end of the week, we were flipping over logs, finding critters, and he reached down without even really thinking about it, and he grabbed a millipede and he stuck it out to show me. And then he realized what he did, and he, it was just instinct at that point. And he just looked up. He was like, "Hey man, thanks for making nature cool. I wouldn't have done this a week ago." I'm like, "Yeah, I know you wouldn't have done this a week ago because I saw you on Monday, And so it was, kind of having, again, that experience and reminding folks that you don't have to be somewhere, far away to be finding cool nature things. And so there's programs like that, a lot of it's locally, not local by citywide local, but neighborhood locally driven community aspects and things. And so there's some wonderful programs out there. And yeah, it's important, essential work for sure. Another example, we had some students I worked in Northwest Ohio, and we had a group come down from outside of the Detroit area, and they got off the bus and they took that big, deep inhale. And it was one of those spring days where it had rained earlier in the day and sort of that nice freshness was in the air.
Sure.
And one girl was like, "It really stinks out here." And then her friend was like, "Stinks? No, this is what nature smells like." And they're like, "Yeah, this is what nature smells like." And, for me, I was like, well, this is the most beautiful nature day out there and stuff. And so, yeah, kind of the connections that were made on those sorts of experiences, they stick with me and they inspire me, honestly.
That's fantastic. I'm curious, before we close down the podcast today, there's a book you wrote, Earth Almanac, Nature's Calendar for Year-Round Discovery. I was fascinated by that when I started to do the research for today's episode. Ken, tell us more a little bit about that book and what's the objective for it?
Yeah, this was a really fun project for me to work on because it's all of those things in nature that, might get overlooked. And so it's a daily nugget of nature, and it's bird stuff, it's mammal stuff, it's plant things, it's astronomy, it's geology, it's a little bit of everything. And it's a continent-wide thing. And so I say that it's seasonally based, and I, think of the term phenology, which is sort of the patterns and things and the timing of things in nature. And so kind of as the spring flowers are blooming or as the birds are returning from migration, it turns out it's impossible to have phenology on a continent-wide scale. But I, tried to do that as well as possible. And I have a lot of flexibility. So, the American woodcock, for example, is doing its spring mating ritual. They do these really cool flights up, and then the males flutter down as they perform these territorial. So they're doing that in the South right now, and it won't be for another couple of months in the North. So I could put that any day, in this sort of window. So I had a little flexibility. And there's other things like the March 6th example. That day in history is when the starling was first released in North America. And it was in Central Park. This man wanted to release the birds that Shakespeare mentioned. And so he brought 60 starlings and released them into Central Park on March 6th. It was 1890 or so. And so there's, some sort of historical connections as well. But yeah, my favorite part, though, I wrote the book, and my favorite part's Jeremy Collins' illustrations. He did such a really great artwork that goes along with it.
Fantastic. Yeah, I was seeing a couple of the illustrations and very nice work. And folks, we'll definitely provide a link back to Earth Almanac, Nature's Calendar for Year-Round Discovery on our show notes. And I do have to give you a shout out, Ken. There's coming out to Vegas and realizing there's these wonderful parks, the desert parks, Mojave, Joshua Tree, and Death Valley, etc. And you wrote this book, Ranger Rick's Travels in National Parks. And so that's another great little book I think folks would love to discover as well.
Yeah, the National Parks book was a fun one to put together. Although now it's out of date. We have a brand new national park that came out. It's kind of established after the book came out. So
now you have a reason to get it updated.
New River Gorge. Sorry, go ahead.
No, what was that? Which one?
The New River Gorge in West Virginia.
Okay. Wow. Well, I just think it's just fascinating. And I get a Facebook promotion like literally every day. It's just, how you go into the big cities that have transit systems, the underground or the subways. There's a transit map of national parks t-shirt, and I have to get one of those. I think that'd be so cool.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
So what are you working on next that would be of interest for our readers as they kind of get to know more about you and your work?
Yeah, I've been working. I do a fair number of posts for the Nature Conservancy for their Cool Green Science webpage, which is really, really fun to work with. And that's another Outdoor Writers Association of America connection. Matt Miller is kind of the guy in charge of that for the Nature Conservancy. And so I've got a couple of articles that I'm putting together for him that I'm really excited about. I've got some Birds and Blooms work. That was sort of one of my big favorite clients to work with for freelance stuff is the Birds and Blooms articles. I've got a couple things on, let's see, what do I just did one on Pyroluxia. There's a southwestern bird for you. It kind of looks like a lot like a cardinal, but it's got a little bit different colorations on it and just sort of really only found in the Southwest. So yeah, things like that are kind of fun to work on. And I've got a new book project that I'm getting going on. I'll be working on a tree book in the future. So look forward to putting that together in the coming months.
Fantastic. We just interviewed Barbara Ann Mojica and her husband, Victor. Victor wrote is the illustrator, but it was she has a book series for children, Little Miss History. And so we just did an interview. Little Miss History visits Sequoia National Park. And I've never seen a sequoia. I've never seen a redwood. I now know there's a difference between sequoias and redwoods. So I just trees are fascinating. It's, again, something that being in the middle of the city like Chicago, you don't truly appreciate it. So what kind of trees are you going to be writing about?
So that one I'm gonna be sort of just looking at a number of cool aspects about trees and stuff. And so some of the cool like root adaptations or the different seed things, or talking about sort of the cool canopy things. I'm gonna definitely talk about maple sugar in season because that's one of my favorite things to do in nature is to tap a maple tree. And so it's gonna be another one that's sort of a continent-wide approach to nature and to the trees specifically. And so, the New England, the fall foliage gets so much attention, but there's so much cool things going on, and the southern swamp forest as well, and the Pacific Northwest, and you got the Douglas firs up there, and just kind of a greatest hits of trees across the country, really.
Fantastic. Well, definitely looking forward to that. Hey, Ken, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, where are the best places for them to go?
Yeah, you can definitely, sort of find me online at kenkeffer.net. And that can get you as a, launch place to everything else and get you to my books, but also to my social media things. So, I'm on Twitter. We mentioned the Sorex Scenarios account. I'm also doing a Facebook group, I call it the Earth Almanac Club, where I'm trying to post sort of daily nature. And it's, sort of following the book for now, but I'm about through my entire year cycle on that. So I'm trying to open that up more to just, more community-based conversations about conservation. So, kind of encourage folks to check me out there as well. And yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm in all the places.
You're in all the big places. That's great. And we'll definitely provide the backlinks to kenkeffer.net and to your social sites. And we'll also link a couple of the books back to like the Earth Almanac and Ranger Rick's Travels and the Kids Outdoor Adventure book, back on Amazon as well. Ken, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. And, I want to put you on the spot because, hey, I get to do it. It's my show. If you could leave our listeners with, let's say, an insight to go. We on occasion have this as a feature where it's something you could share, whether it's an article, a quote, a book, a poem, whatever ever entices you that you could leave for our audience, using your work as kind of the basis for that insight?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great question, and when I think to what is really getting me excited these days, well, one of the things that comes to mind is it's another podcast actually, and it's called Out There, the Out There podcast. It's done by she was a Wyoming public radio reporter, Willow Belden's her name, and she's putting together this great storytelling podcast and really focusing in on some of those underrepresented voices in the outdoor spaces. And so just really incredible stories and great storytelling. And so that I really do try to listen to the Out There podcast as much as I can. And I think your listeners would appreciate the efforts they're doing there as well.
Fantastic. Well, we'll definitely provide a link back to Will Belden's podcast, the Outdoor Podcast. So really, it's a community. What I love about this format, it's a community you can begin to build and nurture, and you never know where it's going to lead. It's kind of how I got led to the outdoor adventures and realizing there's something here. And it's fun. I get to meet really cool people like you. And I'm never going to have a beard like that, but I do grow a beard on occasion. But that's that is a good looking beard, and we definitely. What I would love, Ken, just again putting you on the spot just a little bit. On our show notes, we often put pictures of our guest work. So if there's any photographs of perhaps even the Sorex cinereus, the black-tailed prairie dog, or something of interest that you'd like to share with our audience about your work, a picture or two, we'd really love to have that for our show notes. So hopefully you'll be open to sharing that with us.
Yeah, maybe I can find a picture of me in the Gobi Desert.
There you go. Would love that. Once again, Ken, thank you so much for joining us and taking time out of your day, and look forward to continuing to get to know more about you and your work.
Yeah, I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. All right, folks, there you have it. Another addition to our outdoor adventure series on the Success Insight podcast. We have just been chatting with Ken Keffer. He's a freelance writer and speaker, a professional naturalist, and award-winning environmental educator and author. And we just today talked about a broad range of topics, everything from his research to education, educating kids, the books he's writing, the articles he's writing. What I find with this podcast is that the professions we go into are so varied, and really what's very clear is Ken and the passion he has for his work, and to making sure, whether it's people like me or young kids, parents, etc., are aware of the environment and nature that is all around us, and his work definitely promotes the exploration and the growth of that interest. So we hope you enjoyed today's podcast with Ken. We're going to have many more episodes in our outdoor adventure series on the Success Insight podcast. Do let us know what you think about today's podcast. We love feedback, and you can share it on our Success Insight podcast page. We also have pages on Facebook and on LinkedIn, Success Insight Podcast. And we are on the major podcasting platforms, Spotify, Pandora, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music. I think I've got them all, Spotify, etc. We're just about everywhere, even on YouTube. Okay, folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day. Go out there and get into nature, okay? We're coming off a very interesting 2020 with COVID, but as things start to open up and traveling out to nature is a wonderful way to really breathe some good fresh air, okay? So get out there, take care of yourselves, your family, continue to practice social distancing and wear your mask. And we will see you on the next episode of the Success Insight Podcast. Take care now.
Success Insight is a production of Fox Coaching and First Story Strategies. Find us online, successinsightpodcast.com.